Is it recording?
Yeah, we're live.
Okay. So my question is, you have all these organizations that claim to be defending Christians. Most of them are not intimately familiar with the details of the conflict. Most of them have never had representatives on the ground, and certainly not in both countries. They're relying on what is being told to them. So what is their credibility on this issue? Why should anyone listen to them given that they've never been and they're basically relying on talking points that are being fed to them?
So I'm going to point out a couple of things here. I'm going to start with Azerbaijan. You've been on the
Mm-hmm.
ground there. You understand the situation. You understand the people. They're warm. They're welcoming. They're multicultural. They're multi-ethnic, and they're multi-religious. So they have a
Mm-hmm.
tolerance for everyone. I mean, I've never encountered a hostile conversation with an Azerbaijani person, regardless of religious views. And I've personally never been in Armenia, but from what I understand through an educated opinion as an anthropologist, um, I do believe that there is some Christianity, but there has to be a mixture of religions, especially if the Russians are involved. Um, but they know how to pull the strings and organize.
Mm-hmm.
So if they say they're of Christian faith, then any other Christian throughout the world is going to listen because they mentioned that they were Christian. Pardon me, we're having an earthquake. Um, so it's as simple as all anybody has to hear is that one set of Christians is under attack and they're all going to mobilize. They don't care what the facts are, and they know, especially here in America, that the Christian community will mobilize quickly. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'll hazard a guess. I mean, you're Jewish, so if the Jewish community here in the United States heard that Israel, for instance, was under attack or being attacked, would they not mobilize?
I mean, yes, to varying degrees and depending on what that would entail, but there would be a general sense of concern at the very least.
Okay, so that makes sense to me, and that helps ground my point
What?
here. Um, they would think about their reaction. It would be staged. It would be discussed. It would be planned. Of course, there would be action. Now, what Armenia has done is they have claimed that um, Azerbaijan is moving to ethnically cleanse them from lands that belong to them, and we know that's not the case. It's easy to mobilize an army if you claim some kind of religious dispute or grief.
So I'd like to ask you, this ties into larger issues in the region and beyond the region, because some of the religious justification for this level of concern is that these guys are supposedly providing a safe haven for minorities persecuted in Turkey, Syria, other parts of the Middle East where Christianity is increasingly under attack. At the same time, allegedly Iran is one of the backers of Armenia on this, and Iran certainly is known for its persecution of Christians. So how do you explain this complete lack of this cognitive dissonance and this disconnect in all these claims and issues and the way this is being processed?
I'd say it's completely asinine because you and I both know that Iran's not going to back anybody that's friendly to Christianity.
Hmm.
It's just not going to happen.
Hmm.
Um, I would have a better opportunity to have a conversation with my dog than I would Iran discussing, protecting Christians. Um, I would offer anybody in Armenia, not here in the United States or anywhere else in the world, somebody from Armenia, show me how you're protecting Christianity and still being inclusive of all of these people that you're working with? I would really like to know.
Uh, I'm sorry, just 1 second.
No, you're fine.
You have the situation where there's a complete lack of where you have multiple international actors weighing in. Turkey is backing Azerbaijan. Several other countries are backing Armenia. A large portion of the world is, of course, deeply concerned about Erdogan's actions around this event. But for some reason, there's less concern about Russia's involvement, Qatar's alleged involvement, Iran's involvement in backing claims. They're not being investigated or highlighted. How do you explain that?
Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at this from a geopolitical standpoint. The reality is Azerbaijan and Turkey share an expanse of border region. There is a history there, and I'm not going to focus on Turkey right now, but I'm going to focus as this applies to Azerbaijan. There is established commerce, there is support that goes both ways. If you share a border with someone, you should probably have economic ties with those people and request support. So I can understand Turkey backing Azerbaijan on this. On the other hand, I can completely understand Russia backing Armenia. I don't have to like it, but it's a reality. They have long-standing agreements between the two countries, and Russia's holding pat to that. Iran just wants to stick its nose wherever it can stick its nose. I mean, that's the reality of it. They have some influence because of their location, but the reality of it is Iran's known for funding terrorism and for taking proxy groups and building them up. And looking at it from an anthropological standpoint, you can see that they wouldn't mind doing that to Armenia as well. The shocking part about it is that Armenia wouldn't even realize it was happening to it.
So, if we have all these multiple international actors meddling with varying degrees of legitimacy, and how do you manage to break through what is a legitimate level of backing and what is meddling that only escalates the conflict, especially since both sides are accusing each other of using mercenaries, and there are reports that haven't been really confirmed by anyone, and there are heads of state making comments about all of this. So what is a person to do in such a situation?
Well, you're really going to back me into a corner with this one.
I ask all the easy questions as usual.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So, to put it mildly, everybody's meddling in everybody else's shit. Turkey is going to attack anybody that thinks that the PPK is involved. They've used those tactics in Syria. They've used them throughout the world to justify attacks that didn't need to be made. Of course, Armenia's got their own problems, and they're going to spin around and spin it to Russia so that Russia is going to provide backing. See, the interesting point here is that Azerbaijan's being accused of having all of these mercenaries that are coming to fight for them, and it doesn't make any sense at all. They have a population of 10 million people. and a standing active army of 140,000 soldiers. And they have a reserve program that I believe can call up to as much as 70,000 more people. They don't need to bring mercenaries in to fight for them. They're perfectly capable of countering any Armenian offensive without assistance. Now, Armenia, on the other hand, is using its lack of size of force on its own to play the victim card to the international community, primarily Russia and a few other places, so that they can have troops and equipment and weapons and ammunition and everything else brought to them and catered to them. The interesting point about this is, if you look at the videos that are circulating on social media, the majority of them look like they've been staged. So, to the untrained eye, it could be a soldier laying in Azerbaijan telling mercenaries not to come and fight because this is what's going to happen to them. But to the trained eye, it really looks like they had somebody that got shot in Armenia that was capable of speaking in a dialect that wouldn't be detected, and staging an opportunity to make it look like mercenaries had been brought in. I call on either side to produce the bodies of Syrian mercenaries. I want to see it.
So here's my question. To zero on your earlier point about satellite imagery, why hasn't either side made satellite imagery available to the public that would show the movements of the alleged mercenaries and so forth?
Well, there's a military aspect of it. The reality of it is Azerbaijan has made these available. They make it very public where their troops are stationed. They establish a front line. They provide images from the front. They provide images from cities and jurisdictions that have been attacked. Armenia does not provide these. And to be fair, Armenia, unless they're relying on Russia, doesn't have the money to purchase and procure satellite imagery that's newer than, say, 6 days old.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, there is no hard evidence that anyone's been actually killed who's from Syria or whatever. All we see is propaganda videos from other locations with these guys boasting about it. But you have the president of France making comments about it and leaving accusations. You have the Secretary of State who is concerned about these reports, but so far no one has apparently provided information denying these allegations. What is going on? Why all these people feel compelled to comment on something that has not been firmly established? Why mention it at all in public until it becomes clear what's going on, and until they receive the information that this is true or not true?
I'll start with France. France is a little angry and butthurt that they got removed from the Minsk group. They may not have been removed completely. However, their position of leadership has been questioned and revoked. The reality of it is they've had 30 years to make headway with discussions and diplomacy, and they haven't done a goddamn thing. So, of course, the first thing that the French president's going to do is jump to his own defense, because it gives him a black eye in the international community. I would advise anybody that has any formal alliances with France to understand that they're going to follow the money. I said this on social media yesterday. I said this in an interview with an NBC affiliate recently. They're going to follow the money. They're going to side with anybody that they feel can enrich them or protect them. and they're going to bark like a barking dog at anybody that they feel is a threat, but they are not going to follow through with anything. Now, to be fair, the United States, and if the Secretary of State sees this video, I'm sorry, sir, but the reality is, he's going to look at the reports and he's going to understand that Azerbaijan is perfectly capable of protecting itself against the current threat. And while Washington is not going to send troops, we provide other support. And it's a matter of munitions and numbers. There is a threat to Azerbaijan, but it's a threat that Azerbaijan can handle. The problem that Azerbaijan is having right now is the international community keeps condemning them for defending their own lands. Of course, the United States isn't going to mobilize. You know, they're defending their own lands. They're defending international territories that have been established by the United Nations. This is nothing new. This has been going on for 30 years.
Now, Azerbaijan's claim goes to Nagorno-Karabakh, goes back to the early 19th century, to treaties with Russia, Treaty of Golestan as an example. Nevertheless, most people only believe that this territory was quote-unquote given or granted to Azerbaijan by Stalin, and that all of this is due to Soviet colonialist policies and so forth. Why is there this basic disconnect between historical this historical claim to legitimacy and other points in time where other regimes and governments have intervened to weigh in on it?
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. A recent verified document has surfaced showing that Russia never gave NK to anyone, to the Armenians. They never granted them that. Armenia moved in 28 years ago with the breakup of the Soviet Union, and they decided they were going to occupy territories that were internationally recognized as Azerbaijan. And they have a colonialist approach, an expansionist approach, very similar to Japan in the 1940s and late 30s. It's all about Armenian nationalism for them. They've occupied these lands. So the international community likes to cry that these people have lived there for 30 years, leave them alone. The point is they have lived there illegally for 30 years, and Azerbaijan has tried the peaceful approach, and it didn't work. And whenever Azerbaijan speaks out against them, they start sniping children and attacking cities. It happened in 1988, it happened in 1992, and it's happening now. There's no question as to who actually lays claim to those territories. The United Nations took care of that, almost 30 years ago. And it's happened not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times that those resolutions have been affirmed. So, I mean, how many times do you have to hear no before, somebody has to smack you in the mouth?
But nevertheless, we have seen that the international community has taken no action to actually enforce these resolutions. There's been no Armenian official sanctions as a result of it. I mean, what does that tell you about the importance of these resolutions and laws if they're so easy to ignore? I mean, and of course, there's also this selective approach to applications of international laws. In some cases, people will call the same territory occupied. In other cases, they'll call it disputed, and a lot of it has less to do with the actual status than their own political leanings. So how do resolve the issue of the fact that there's been no real attempt to hold Armenia accountable for these violations?
Well, I don't want to sound like an asshole, but, I've never really been accused of being a nice guy. Truthful, yes, but nice, no. Armenia doesn't really fucking matter on the international stage. it was a territorial dispute between neighbors. And realistically, the UN backed both of them, saying, okay, we've established borders that have been accepted for both of you. And we expect you to uphold that. Despite many claims, the United States, who is a presumptive leader of the United Nations, is not the world's police officer. And the international community, unless it's affecting them or their trade or their money, they don't give a shit about anybody. So we basically figured that Azerbaijan could handle it themselves. You know, the rules that everybody else has to follow have been established. Azerbaijan has done the right thing throughout the years, and Armenia is like a stubborn child being told no. They don't want to listen. They feel like their view is the only view, and they use every method possible of making everybody else see it that way too. And, you know, most of the international community is acting like somebody that's not the parent of the child, and they just don't want anything to do with it because it's not their problem.
Mm-hmm. So, meanwhile, most people are not going to be digging into international law books or history books to figure out who's right here. They'll be looking at the news and seeing the most and leaning towards most ostentatious claims. And Armenians have been making pretty serious claims of supposedly cluster bombs being used and so forth. Well, what do you have to say about the use of deadly weapons in this conflict, and what is true? We've been hearing a lot of conflicting claims about who shot whom and who attacked whose civilians and with what weapons.
Okay. So, once again, you know, easy questions. I'll start with the attacking of civilians. Azerbaijan has not purposely targeted any civilians on the Armenian side. Armenians use the typical Soviet concept of establishing military bases and things of that nature in populous areas, and then they wonder why people are dying when you know that machine gun nest or that tank got attacked. That's called collateral damage, and if you knew how to fight an actual war, you'd be smart enough to take your stuff away from your population. Now, on the flip side, Armenia has specifically targeted civilians. I know they don't like it when I do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Nicole gave the whole game plan away in an interview that was published last week when he said they were going to specifically target civilians to ignite chaos. Now, that pretty much settles that. By the way, Azerbaijan doesn't establish military bases or military units in populated areas because they're not stupid. If you see somebody in Azerbaijan that's a civilian that got killed, then Armenians attacked the civilians, or there were some civilians running through the battlefield being looky-loos that didn't deserve to be there. Now, on the issue of weapons. Now, I'm a military guy. I'm a military expert. Weapons are my thing. You know that. I love to blow shit up. I make the biggest boom I can. That wasn't a cluster bomb. First off, if that was a cluster bomb, there wouldn't be anything left. You know, half a cluster bomb does not...
why don't you explain for the general public what is a cluster bomb and how do you tell the difference between it and some other weapons?
So, I'll try to break this down into rudimentary terms without giving away specified intel.
Okay.
A cluster bomb has multiple munitions that are designed to disperse over an area and detonate in a cluster. It's not multiple missiles that are strapped together that fire in. You know, there are designs that that predicate that, but none of these have been used. What was shown in the news and claimed to be a cluster bomb was actually a Scud, and I'm not a Scud expert, but I'm relatively certain there was not a warhead that was designed to be a cluster warhead for a Scud missile. I don't think that the designers and manufacturers had access to that type of technology. A cluster bomb, for instance, about 20 years ago, a B-52 carrying several cluster bombs crashed 250 miles north of San Diego in the desert. And when it crashed, the impact was so loud and so forceful that it was felt here in San Diego 250 miles away, and it registered a 4.5 on the Richter scale. What was used in Azerbaijan was not a cluster munition. And anybody that thinks it was is a fool.
It's been also a major focus on claiming that Israelis are supplying Azerbaijan with deadly drones and other sophisticated weapons that are then used for attempted genocide, as some of these guys are claiming. And in fact, these claims are coming from the Armenian camp, and others have picked up on it. Accusing somebody of an attempted genocide would generally require a very high level burden of evidence just to even make that claim. And it's very disturbing to see real atrocities, real genocides being kind of diluted in this way without any level of even attempt to examine anything here. I mean, this is ludicrous, and yet a number of reputable organizations have picked up on this term. They've also ignored this focus on Israel. Actually, Russia is a top supplier of weapons for Azerbaijan. Well, can you comment about this whole thing, and how is it that Armenians didn't seem to know what Azerbaijan had and didn't have, and why wasn't this an issue prior to these attacks?
Well, I call bullshit. Russia supplies all of them. They all have Russian weapons. Azerbaijan has some Turkish weapons. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel had provided some weapons. There are ties between Azerbaijan and Israel, as there should be. The reality of it is, it's who has the better weapons. Armenia is making a stink about it because Azerbaijan has the better weapons and the better training. The reality of it is they throw genocide around because they know it's going to get people's attention. There's no genocide here. Azerbaijan is simply saying, you're on my property and I've asked you for 30 years to leave and you keep hurting my friends, so now I want you to fucking leave. And if you're not going to leave, then I'm going to fight you. And that's what's happening. There's no genocide here. In fact, the Azerbaijani people, they don't feel great when they have to attack Armenians. That doesn't make them happy. There's no genocide there. Armenia is so trite and condescending of the rest of the world that they literally chain their war fighters to fighting positions. That's some shit we haven't seen since Russia and Germany and the Nazis back in the day. I mean, that kind of shit doesn't happen now unless you're forcing an army to fight for you that doesn't want to fight for you anymore.
And yet we see a complete lack of common sense, and you see the international community spreading this and kind of almost contributing to the escalation of the conflict. And this raises the question, why did Armenia feel so comfortable attacking a bigger, stronger country with better weapons?
Because they knew they would be able to play the victim card right now. Let me make a point about the general international community. This doesn't apply to everybody, but if it offends you, good, be offended and go cry me a fucking river and get over it. The international community as a whole looks to celebrities like Kim Kardashian to provide them with guideposts for how to react and act. You know, that Armenia figured they could claim the victim role and run in with their black eye and cry to the rest of the world, and they figured that everybody was going to come to their defense. You know, if you notice, yes, people are sending money, people are sending support, but nobody other than Russia and a few others are sending their troops. And there's a reason for that. You know, we paint Russia out to be the bad guy, but Russia's not really the bad guy here. Russia's going to help because they have commitments, but they're only going to help so far. They're not going to provide them with an army to smash somebody that they also do business with. They evened the odds a little bit, is what they did. I respect that. I actually respect that. They evened the odds a little bit, but they didn't tip them either way.
So where do you think this is all heading?
Well, if Armenia is smart, they're going to get the hell out of Azerbaijani territory and this conflict will be over. But
do you believe that's going to happen?
No, I absolutely do not. I believe that they've been there for 30 years and they have learned how to talk really well, except for when they're the ones on the chopping block. I believe that they're going to push this conflict, and they're going to continue to kill men, women, and children, and they're going to make false claims, and it's just going to turn into a big mess. You know, the reality is nobody had to die over this. Nobody on either side. Nobody had to die over this. And you can't bring up the argument that 3,500 years ago your people lived here because, you know, well, then none of us could live where we're at. It's bullshit. It's bullshit if you get to be the only person in the world that gets to lay claims that are 3,500 years old. It doesn't work that way. It's not realistic. You know, the internet, the world governance has determined that you have a set of borders, and those are your borders. And unless you annex them through a political process or take them in a war or illegally occupy them, your borders don't change. Your borders are your borders. I mean, you can buy land from somebody else, but illegally occupying it, that's crap.
Do you believe, in light of the upcoming U.S. elections, that there is a bigger agenda here than just the usual by Armenia?
No, I think that it's coincidental. I think that no matter how the U.S. election plays out, the response from America, who's got its own problems at the moment, by the way, is going to be the same. This is one of those times where we have to worry about us before we worry about everybody else. But unless there's people like you or me that are going to tell the truth for other people, because America doesn't want to listen to the truth about itself, you know, that was the only coincidence here. It just so happened to fall in line. I mean, this has been brewing since 30 years ago. You know, it's impossible to set the timetable on something like a presidential election in the United States.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, and what do you see happening outside the conflict here, back in the U.S., in light of this continuous information warfare campaign? Do you see further divisions? Do you see this affecting relationships in the media, in the journalism world? We've already had experience of people breaking ties with us over disagreements and, you know,
well, listen,
and over operating with different information.
Most people don't realize that Armenia has spent literally $2.4 million to make us keep our mouths shut, and it hasn't worked. That's the reality. Sorry, we've got another earthquake. That's the reality of it, and it's an unfortunate thing. It really is. You know, there's going to be continuous division. The U.S. is all about division right now, and they will seize any opportunity to latch onto one side or another on a conflict because it diverts from what's actually going on here. I've seen it on social media. People are attacking one another. They are, using the same slogans and everything else that Black Lives Matter is using. They're doing all of that. Armenia has paid $2.4 million to shut us up, and we still won't. They've paid major media organizations to stop carrying our stories. They've threatened me. They've threatened you. They've physically come after me. I don't know what their expectation is, but the only weapon that I have at this point in time is my voice and the truth.
Well, what's your advice? Just to wrap this up, what's your advice for anyone watching this and trying to get the sense of what's going on and how to react to it and how to deal with this huge mess?
I think that anybody that's watching this should educate themselves. Find reputable sources. Wiki.org and websites of that nature don't necessarily provide you with accurate information. I mean, they're edited by other users. Dive into the history books. I know that's a foreign concept for a lot of you, but if you want to know what's really going on, use Google Scholar to look up scholastic articles and journals that pertain to this. If you're going to use Google or the internet, use that. That's the best way that you're going to find informative, real information. Educate yourselves as to what's at stake for both of them, and look at the histories for both countries. And then, from a sociological standpoint, look at how their populations are acting throughout the world. Anyone that has ties to them, and that's a good indicator for what the truth is.
Thank you. That was very thought-provoking as usual, and I'm sure we'll have many more opportunities to discuss this and other issues because I don't see an end in sight.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you very much, and I'll get together with you later.